When you think of modern instruments, what comes to mind? Is there innovation happening in the world of instruments? Is anything new being built? My friend Christopher Steig, who came on way back in episode 3 to talk about symphonic wind band, has a beef with the modern symphony. Specifically, he feels strongly that the saxophone has earned its place as a symphonic instrument and should be standardly included in the wind section alongside clarinets for all composers writing modern symphonic music. But a lot of orchestras still consider it a new instrument, too new for the classical world. Well, today I'm speaking with someone who is teaching a whole college class on what might be the most surprising instrument I've encountered so far, and definitely way more modern than the saxophone, the iPad. Welcome to Zeitgeist Radio. I'm Morgan Rowe. Today, I'm speaking with a college professor who runs an ensemble of iPads in live improvisatory performances. My guest today is Dr. Drake Andersen, a composer and music professor at Central Connecticut State University. Drake, welcome to Zeitgeist Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Morgan.
I'm excited. We were colleagues together at our alma mater, Macalester College, back in the Bachelor of Arts days.
Absolutely.
And it's so fun to connect with you again. Let's take a second, and can you tell everybody, who are you musically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think of myself as kind of an accumulation of things. Usually if someone asks me what I do, I say I'm a composer. That's kind of what my training is in, and that's what I've studied the most and probably done the most. But I also like to perform, mostly using electronic instruments now, but back in the day I played the flute, I play some guitar and piano. I also think of myself as, I guess you could say, a technologist, in that I like to explore different kinds of technological tools for music making. Sometimes I'll design my own software, design little, interactive systems or little instrument kind of things to make music with. So, composer is kind of the label that I, most identify with, I guess, but there's a whole lot of other things going on too, I like to think.
One of the things I loved about reconnecting is that you are one of very few people from undergrad who are doing exactly what they set out to do in undergrad. You always wanted to be a composer, at least since I, met you in, I think, sophomore year. I remember getting more connected, and you're doing it. Like, you have kept that all the way through. It's so cool. You were so focused on composition in undergrad, and now here you are doing exactly that. I just find that really exciting, because certainly not what happened to me.
Well, I feel very lucky. I'm incredibly lucky to be in the position that I'm in and to get to do, just about what I want to do a lot of the time. I feel very, very lucky to be in this situation. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So we're here specifically today to talk about a project that you have at your college. We could talk about many things, but we're going to talk about an iPad ensemble. So
Yes.
Before we get too deep into it, can you just, broad strokes, what is this?
Yeah, so an iPad ensemble is a musical ensemble where the instrument is the iPad, to put it simply, right? So you could have a percussion ensemble, you could have a string ensemble, you could have a wind ensemble. This is an iPad ensemble.
And whose crazy idea was this?
So it was actually founded by my predecessor at Central Connecticut State, Dr. Charles Minoche, who has actually unfortunately since passed away. But he, in I think it was 2016, initiated this iPad ensemble where students perform as a chamber ensemble using iPads. And so it's something that I'm very into, but not something that I came up with or even started at this particular institution.
Yeah. What went through your head when you first heard about it?
Yeah, I thought so my reference point for this kind of group is either one, like kind of an electronic music group, which is a category of group that exists at some universities where people will play different kinds of electronic instruments. It tends to be very different from school to school. So you might have one group that's, I don't know, like uh, people playing like small handheld synthesizers, or people playing theremins, or people playing drum machines, or samplers. All kinds of different things are possible, right? And then the other big reference point is something called a laptop orchestra, which I'm a little bit familiar with. And that's something that has a little bit more of a history, at least from like the late 1990s. Probably there's some even earlier examples, but an iPad ensemble is kind of a slightly different thing, I guess.
Yeah, I could ask about any number of those, but let's talk. Um, let's talk again about. So when you first heard about this, uh, and then you were either asked or were voluntold to teach this course. um, how did you approach it? Because it's a little different, it looks like, than some of the other organizations, ensembles.
Yeah. So my first thought was kind of like, what is the performance practice of a group
Yeah.
like this? And if you think about, performance practices, like how people perform, like what are the traditions that they use, what are the expectations, what are the things that you do, what are the things that you don't do. And I had to, at first I tried to kind of figure out what had been done in the past. And I was able to find out a little bit just from talking to people and finding some clips of previous performances. But ultimately, I had to kind of decide on my own performance practice in terms of what was going to work artistically, what was going to work pedagogically with the students that I have, what was going to work technologically. And so I kind of set out thinking about like, okay, what is our performance practice? What is our working practice going to look like? And then everything kind of falls into place from that. Like, how much do we need to rehearse? What's the structure of the rehearsals going to look like? How many performances are we going to give per semester? What are those performances going to look like? So all of that I thought of as kind of coming from the practice of performing and the practice of rehearsing, and just kind of at least trying to let it kind of naturally emerge out of the rehearsal process, rather than thinking like, okay, I want to end up here, how do I get there?
Yeah. So what did you come up with? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so the first thing that I kind of decided on was that I wanted it to be an improvisation based group. There are obviously most kind of classical type ensembles or ensembles within a department of music or within a university or a college are going to be notation and work based. So the director will choose the repertoire for the season, for the semester, and they'll give it out to the students, and then the students prepare it, using the sheet music, using notation, and then you give that performance at the end of the semester. So it's, that's kind of that's that model of performance practice, right? If you do something that's more improvised, then the question of like, well, what actually are we preparing? How many pieces are we preparing? Who created these pieces? All those questions suddenly become a little bit more ambiguous. And it can be a challenge, but luckily there's already some really good performance practices that we can borrow from improvised forms of music like jazz, right? So what I ended up doing was kind of thinking of the group not stylistically as a jazz group, but in terms of the way we structured rehearsals and prepared performances as very much like a jazz combo or a jazz big band that's preparing charts that have a certain degree of flexibility within them, and that sometimes are like distinct pieces, but a lot of times aren't necessarily. And so far, 2 years in, that's been working reasonably well.
I imagine there's not a lot of rep written for iPad.
There,
Is there
there's
any?
not. There is some out there, and if you kind of go through like the different electronic music listservs out there, and like some kind of specialized databases, like you can find things. The compositions that you'll typically find are things that are kind of like for open instrumentation, where any group of musicians could play it. Things like graphic scores, which we've done a lot of, especially this semester.
What's that?
So a graphic score is a kind of musical notation where instead of using notes and rests and rhythms and time signatures and key signatures, you use graphic symbols or lines or even verbal instructions to guide the musicians, but not necessarily to dictate exactly what sounds they're going to be using. So that can be really helpful when you're using an instrument that there's not a lot of repertoire for, like the iPad, because it gives the performers a lot of latitude to interpret those symbols. So it's like, oh, what does that yellow rectangle mean? Or what does that kind of hazy lavender kind of shading? How are we going to interpret that musically? Is that a C sharp or a D? You know, and you can have a lot of fun with that.
Do you get kids with like synesthesia type that have strong opinions on that?
Yeah, every once in a while, yeah, someone will be like, "Oh, no, there's absolutely no way that you could interpret this as anything else," and it's kind of like, well, you know, a big part of it is though having the students recognize that they're in a group and they're not just working
Yeah.
individually, right? So,
Yeah.
so those kind of negotiations can be really interesting and actually really instructive for the students, I think, because so much of like electronic music, and even like if you make music on a laptop on your iPad, it tends to be very solitary, where you're working in a DAW
Yes.
and just kind of doing your thing. And there's something kind of paradoxical about making music on an iPad with other people who are also on iPads. But I think we've found a way, I think through improvisation in particular, to make it very social as well.
So let's talk about that. This is open to majors and non-majors. Who is the composition? Like, what types of students are in this class?
Yeah, it's been, I would say there tend to be slightly more music majors than non-majors. And often the non-majors will have some kind of musical background just because of their previous experience, they might be more interested. But I try to teach the course in a way that even if you're coming in without any kind of musical knowledge, you don't know what the notes on the piano keyboard are, you don't know what keys are or meters or anything like that, that you could still come in and start making music pretty quickly. Beyond that, I mean, it's kind of like any kind of electronic music course, which is always going to be a mix of people. You get people coming in that are total beginners, and I've found this. I've taught at a number of different places, and every single place I teach, it's always you'll get some students that come in and they're like making close to professional level, mixes and productions on their laptop in their dorm room, and then you've got people that have never done anything before, and you've got people who want to experiment, you've got people who want to just like recreate exactly the sound of a track that they love. You just get such a wide range of things that the challenge is always to like figure out how to do things in class, how to organize activities that are going to be meaningful to people from all those different backgrounds and all those different experience levels.
Yeah. I think it would probably be helpful at this point to talk about some of the softwares. Can you talk about some of the apps? Because I want to go back to some of those kids, but at this point, like, again, when I was looking at what they need to do to prepare for the class, there's a lot of apps. Can you kind of like high level describe what some of these softwares are? Because it's not like comes with a iPad out of the box, right?
Yeah, yeah. So because we're an iPad ensemble specifically, it's we're kind of one of the limitations that comes in is then we're restricted to things that you can get through the App Store, right?
Yeah,
Which is different than if we were working with a laptop, which has a lot
right.
more things available for it, or even another kind of tablet might have different kinds of apps available for it. And that's just because we happen to have iPads because that's how the group was founded.
Yeah, yeah,
But in terms of the specific apps, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff out there, and it really ranges from I think one big category of apps would be things that are basically more or less like synthesizers. Things like there's an app called Animoog, that's Moog like Bob Moog, Moog, where there's a little piano interface on the tablet screen that you press the piano buttons and then it'll make those notes, and you can choose different kinds of waves and different kinds of filters and effects to get different kind of tone color and timbre, but you're essentially playing a piano on the iPad. There's a lot of apps that are like that. Like I said, Animoog, Ribbons is another really nice one that we've used like that. Then there are some that emulate other kinds of instruments. So like drum pads, for example, there's an app called Korg Gadget that allows you to, it has synthesizers too, but you can also load in like arpeggiators and samplers and drum machines, and then you press buttons on a kind of virtual interface that looks a little bit like the hardware versions of these instruments, and you can trigger sounds that way, or you can sequence sounds. But the category of apps that I find the most interesting are kind of the unusual ones where they don't really resemble any particular instrument that is known to human beings outside of whatever particular app it is. And those you can just have a lot of fun with it. Probably my favorite one is an app called Borderlands, where you can load in audio clips or you can record an audio clip, and then on the screen the audio just kind of floats there. And then what you have to do is create these little, I don't know, they're kind of like little solar systems of little dots and things. And what they are is they're generating little grains of sound that are based on whatever audio the little solar system happens to be overlapping with. And so if you drag the audio under the solar system, it starts to like trigger little grains of sound. And then if you move it away, it stops. And so what you can do is make many different solar systems. You can create many different audio clips, and then you can just kind of mix them all up, and it gets really fun because you can kind of automate like the solar systems to move around in little orbits. You can actually hold up the iPad and use the accelerometer inside of it, so it'll like detect if the surface is flat, everything will stay where it is. But then if you start tilting it, they'll start falling to like the lower side of the screen. And it's just like a super creative, interesting way of interacting with sound. And I know the students have a ton of fun with it, and you just end up with these results that you couldn't possibly get otherwise. So that's one of the really cool things about the iPad as an instrument, is you're not limited to just one kind of interaction or one kind of interface.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many questions just based off what you just said. Starting with, it's like almost like a weird theremin, like
Yeah.
mixed with, mixed with the synthesizer. And in a traditional jazz ensemble, you would have, so you play, in college you played flute. Let's take that as an example. Did you do the jazz ensemble?
I think I did one semester of combos, but actually playing guitar, not playing flute.
Guitar. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take guitar then. It's an improvisatory group, but you play one instrument, guitar, right? Is this the type of ensemble where someone was like, okay, you're on rhythm, you're on melody, you know, like that, or do you let them improvise with the types of roles they play in the ensemble as well, based on what they want to be playing? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's a little bit of both, and it kind of depends on the piece. So we do one of our kind of standby improvisations that we've been doing for a long time is we call beat build up. And what we do is we kind of have a little intro section, we build up a beat, then we kind of vary the beat. So it's kind of like a verse and chorus section. Then we go back to the beat, and then we have an outro. And it always has the same kind of very simple structure. And we started off just kind of just saying, okay, let's just go. Like we choose a key, we choose a tempo, and we go. And over time, it was something that I, anticipated, but something that I allowed the students to kind of discover on their own, was that if everyone's trying to do the same thing, like if we've got multiple people doing the drums, we've got multiple people doing the chords, the texture is going to get really messy and it doesn't necessarily sound the way that we want. So we've had semesters where we've just kind of done it as a free for all, but then this semester it actually came from the students. They were like, we should always make sure that we pick our roles before we jump into this improvisation. And I was really pleased that that was a decision that came from them rather than something that I was imposing.
Yeah.
Because I do want the performance practice to ultimately come from them and for them to be the ones who are, driving it forward rather than me just saying, oh, well, this is the way that we should do it and dictating that way. So we tend to divide up roles. With some improvisations, we won't, and the students will just kind of work out who's doing what over the course of the improvisation. And then there's other pieces we'll do where it doesn't necessarily have like a lead and accompaniment and rhythm section kind of division. And so everyone will just be kind of doing a different thing that they want to do. And, depending on the kind of music, like maybe for a more ambient, kind of sustained, like, Jean-Michel Jarre kind of synth, freak out, that'll end up working okay. So it really depends, but I try to give them the experience of many different ways of interacting with each other.
That sounds kind of like this tradition that we had at McAllister of performing in C, which is it's what, like a 12-hour or 24-hour, you just play in the key of C.
Our version was 24 hours. It doesn't have to be 24 hours.
Right, yeah. I was definitely not there for 24 hours, but yeah, it's just students can cycle in and out. And anyway, the ambient thing that made me think of that. Like,
yeah.
just playing in C. That's as structured as it gets. So they'd have instruments there, or you could bring your own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because I imagine if I was listening to this podcast, I would have this question. How is this not a DJ scenario?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it kind of depends on like what you think of a DJ setup or situation as being. I mean, I think it could be in some respects. I think DJs tend to work with more like pre-composed material that they're rearranging, remixing, filtering, transitioning, changing how many layers are there. And with most of our pieces, we don't start off with the material pre-recorded. We're actually creating the material as part of the improvisation and then transforming it in the ways that you do as an improviser, like making it longer, making it shorter, changing the key, changing the tone color, changing the instrument, changing the texture. So there's a lot of overlap. But I think the focus on improvisation and spontaneity is one big difference. The other difference,
I was sharing this with a friend, and all she just kept asking over and over, like, "Oh, well, do they sample? Is it like this song?" And like picturing sampling songs as the basis of, and like cycling through samples. When most people hear the word samples, that's what they think is like.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
that's a sample that you can.
Yeah. So yeah, we do sample on certain tracks, but usually sometimes they'll preload samples, but usually it's not like a full riff like that or a full loop. It would be like individual drum sounds that then they're sequencing live, or individual instrumental samples. We do some live sampling as well. Like we have a piece called Crowdsource, which continues to evolve. So we're currently on Crowdsource 2.5.
Nice.
And with this version, what we do is at the beginning of the performance, we actually ask the audience to come up and make a sound. And they'll come up, we'll record their sound. And we do this with, I think this performance we did 5 people came up and made sounds. And so, one person will like whistle, one person will clap, one person will say something, one person will sing, whatever it ends up being. And then the students take a couple of minutes to kind of prepare something using their headphones, and then they just improvise a performance using only those samples that were just recorded a moment ago. And it
That's so fun.
yeah, it puts them on the spot a little bit, but they've become really good at doing it. And we've practiced a lot how to kind of prepare that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap. And I mean, DJ performances are great, and they are improvisation and they are spontaneous. So it's absolutely not that we're trying to draw a distinction, but just that's kind of one aspect of what we do, but not necessarily everything that we do.
Do you have a library of sounds, and can you kind of explain where that comes from?
Yeah, we do. I At first I kind of relied on the students to gather sounds, but at a certain point I decided I'm just going to kind of gather some sounds. There's lots of like free sample repositories online, and so I just grabbed a selection of things that the students would be able to use and integrate into performances. And inevitably they end up gathering their own stuff. One student really likes using the Taco Bell sound. That's shown up in a number of performances. I don't, you know, sometimes they'll record themselves saying something. Sometimes they'll record me saying something in rehearsal, and then it'll show up in performance. Um, but that's kind of the idea, is that it should be like a free flowing creative situation, and not just like a top down, like, here's what you need to do, here's the sounds you can use.
Right.
And I think they respond to that.
I love that. So we've talked a lot about that free form. You also have a fake book. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah. So kind of going back to the comparison with jazz, right? So historically, jazz musicians and other folks who play standards, or from the American Songbook and everything, instead of playing from notation, oftentimes musicians will read from charts or lead sheets, which give kind of the skeleton of a song. Like, they might give the tempo and the key, they'll give the chord changes, they might give the lyrics and the melody, but it's not notation in the way that like classical musicians are used to seeing it. And over time, these lead sheets would get collected into collections that were known as like fake books, basically, that you didn't have like the official version of the song, but you had the chart that you could kind of, with your musical experience and knowledge, you could generate the complete version of the song from just looking at the skeleton, right? Or you could use it as the basis for transposing, or whatever might be necessary. And then at some point, somebody published an official fake book called the real book. And there's a whole kind of complicated history, and of course,
Yeah.
there's copyright issues and things with the songs that are under protection. But the basic idea that I glommed onto was, we should have a fake book that includes all of the charts that we typically use in our performances. And then the students always have a reference point where, if they want to remember, oh, what key was this in, or what app did I use, or how long is this performance typically, or what are the kind of guidelines that we decided on as a group, what are the roles, that they can reference that by just downloading the fake book as a PDF. So I try to keep that updated semester by semester, so that the students have a reference point. And then the other thing that's really cool that happens with the group is that students will actually compose their own music. And for pieces that are successful that we want to do in the future, I'll ask the students, hey, can I include your piece in our fake book, and add that to kind of our repertoire? And so we've already started doing that, even just a couple of years in. And so we've got a bunch of pieces that the group has put together, and a bunch of pieces that individuals in the group have actually composed, that now we can draw on and perform again sometime in the future.
That's amazing. So it's generated just from this group. It's not taking other songs from the fake book into yours. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's right.
That's so
We
cool.
haven't done like all of me yet,
Right, right.
I mean, we might, but yeah, at this point, it's much more just kind of like, what's the key, what's the tempo, what are the apps we usually use, and that's a good starting point, for our performances. Yeah.
This is so fun to reconnect with Drake. I remember learning about 20th century composers in class, and he was really into it. He was one of the very few people in class that actually liked Schoenberg, Weber, and some of the others from the 8-tonal and 12-tone eras. I remember him coming to class from soccer practice or about to go to soccer. He was one of the only people in the department that avidly did sports. Like, he was really into soccer and music. And now look what he's doing. I mean, let's go back to his intro. He composes, he designs software, he performs, he builds interactive systems that can be considered instruments. He builds instruments. He leads an iPad ensemble. See, this is what keeps me going. There are all these people, real people out there in the world doing the coolest, most creative stuff. I'm so lucky to be able to talk with them and share parts of their world with you. If you're more of a reader, which I actually relate to a lot, I make a newsletter version of each episode that you can read. It's obviously shorter than these long-form interviews, but it gets the juicy bits. Go to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio to sign up for that. In this second part of the interview, Drake talks about some of the technical things he has to deal with for iPad Ensemble performances. Well, I also have technical issues to work through because I do all my own editing. This podcast runs on love and coffee, and you can buy me a coffee. Go to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio, or there's a link in the description. I will feel the love. Trust me, it will make my week, my month, my year. Also, while you're at it, whatever platform you're hearing this on, please hit subscribe. It means the world to me. All right, let's get back to Drake. So taking all of this, we have like a lot of the baseline for how. Now, like, what is a practice? How do students practice for this?
Yeah, I think the idea of practicing, it takes a little bit of like adjusting to, right? Because you take your iPad home and then you like a big part of practicing is figuring out how to do the things that you might need to do in a performance very quickly and efficiently. So how do I swap instruments? How do I transpose? How do I change the number of notes or the number of octaves that are appearing on the keyboard? Like all these little things that might come in performance. How do I switch from like the higher notes to the lower notes if I want to switch from like a lead part to a bass part? Like being able to do all of those things in a bunch of different apps really quickly without making like unwanted extraneous noise and just becoming really fluent with your instrument. That's a big part of the practicing. And then of course just getting used to the interfaces, like how like precisely do I have to tap the keys, and does the volume change if I apply more pressure or if I click a different part of the key? All those little things that just make the performance go, and the rehearsal frankly just go a lot smoother. That's kind of the practicing. So students will hopefully do a little bit of preparation on their own, and then we come into rehearsal, and most of what we do is just kind of running the pieces and then talking about them afterwards. And I'll add a little bit of guidance, or I'll kind of direct the conversation in one way or another, but usually my focus is just to give them time to play with each other and experience what it's like to improvise in a group and to actually listen to other people and recognize what your role is in relation to others when you're making music.
Getting good at your beep boops, I guess.
That's right.
You condense that down. I had a musician on a while back on the podcast, Joe Newman. He plays iwi, and it was so interesting talking with him about the sounds. And one of the comments he made that seems relevant here is because he plays saxophone as well, and he's like, if people wanted to listen to a saxophone, I'd just play a saxophone. But like, that's not the point. The point is to not sound like a saxophone. Is to sound like something you've never heard before, or you've never heard in this way before. Kind of sounds like that might be a bit of the goal here, not to be a piano, because then you'd just be a piano. You'd just go play piano, right? But to be like, how can we make the piano sound a little different?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think there's absolutely something to that, and maybe it doesn't play out within each piece, but I think over the course of like a performance where we're doing a bunch of different pieces and doing a bunch of different ways of interacting with sound and improvising, you get a sense of like what the depth of the instrument is,
Yeah.
whether you're working with sampled sound or synthesizer kind of tones or sequence tones or whatever it might be. And the other dimension of the performances that I think I initially kind of underestimated is actually the visual aspect of it.
Yeah.
And that's partially, the students just being on stage and like, doing things on their iPads and then people hearing things come out of the speakers. But we also have a setup where typically the individual students' iPad screens are projected behind them. So the
Oh,
audience can
cool.
actually see how they're interacting with the interfaces while they're making the sound. And you can actually connect like, oh, I think they just played that note because I just saw it flash and then I heard it. And the feedback that I've gotten from people who have been to the performances has been that that's like super like a really engaging and important part of the performance for them because I think it's not always the most exciting thing to see people sitting at a laptop or sitting at a tablet doing stuff, but when you can actually see what they're doing on the screen, it becomes evident that they're clearly not just checking their email, right? Like they're doing all these things and swapping between different interfaces and mixing between two different apps at once and all kinds of really sophisticated music technology tasks. And then you can make that connection between what you're hearing and what you're seeing.
That's cool. So let's talk about performances. Since you opened that door wonderfully. How many kids are we talking about here in the ensemble?
Yeah, typically it's about four. Right
Okay.
right now I have 9 students signed up for the fall, which will be a big change if 9 students end up taking the course. I kind of suspect
Yeah.
not all of them are going to take it, but that would definitely be the most that I've had since I've been here. But 4 or 5 is typical, and I think that's pretty manageable if you think about like a band
Yeah.
that's kind of comparable.
So do you plug them into a soundboard or what? How does that
Yeah,
work?
yeah. So I have them all plugged into a mixer. And for rehearsals, we have like this small speaker in the classroom. And then for performances, it'll go through like a big PA system. And one choice that I made early on that I think was as a choice that's worked was that I would never control the output. I would never like mute everybody. Once people are plugged in, we leave the volume up. And it's just like being in any other rehearsal. Like if they want to make a noise to like interrupt me, they could theoretically do that.
Mm-hmm.
But, we just kind of work it out where they don't because, there's like a mutual
Yeah.
respect, right? I think that could be a slightly different dynamic if I were to be like, whenever I wanted to get their attention, I would just like turn down the fader. There's something about that that feels a little, dictatorial or something,
Yeah.
where it's like, I don't, the students they have an opportunity to express themselves. And like, I remember being in band or an orchestra and like the conductor is like, okay, let's quiet down. And you want to make like one last note, like right before, just
Right.
as you're just being like a person, a musician, a student, a kid, whatever, however it is that you kind of identify at the moment, right? That's part of a rehearsal, right? It's like people are expressing themselves in a complex social situation, and so having the PA always kind of open and like students can just like make sounds when they do, I think it makes for a more honest and kind of authentic social interaction because when they're quiet, they've chosen to be quiet because we're, discussing something or someone is speaking. So that's kind of, sorry, a little bit of a tangent from what we were talking about with performance, but yeah, it does speak to kind of the complexity of having like a bunch of electronic instruments that you're trying to get to sound as one cohesive whole, right?
Right. So again, going back to the performance, so
Yeah.
you have everyone plugged into a mixer.
Mm-hmm.
You hope that the feedback is all getting to the mixer at the same time, which I guess would be the same in in an instrumental ensemble too. And then you have a projector or a screen behind each student with their basically a share screen. Right,
Yeah,
going on.
that ends up being a little bit complicated for kind of boring technical reasons because of like the we want the audio to go to one place and we want the video to go to another place.
Right.
And and so we have to use like this kind of horrendous tangle of like dongles and adapters to like get things where they need to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, we end up working it out. We've got one venue on campus that has a really nice new LED screen that we've started using.
Nice.
In the past, we've used projectors, and there's kind of pluses and minuses to all of those things. But yeah, we're kind of, again, we're kind of in the Apple ecosystem, so we're restricted to
Yeah.
what they make available to us.
Yeah. Yeah. What else in a performance? How do the performances go and who attends and what do they look like? How long are they?
Yeah, we tend to go a little bit under an hour. This last one, I think we had 8 or 9 individual numbers. So we did a couple of different versions of beat buildup. Usually, the beat buildup improvisations are usually kind of distinguished by who it is that's creating the drum beat. So we'll have a student that's kind of like featured as the person who starts with the drum beat, and then everyone else layers on top of it. We did crowdsource 2.5. We had a couple of interludes that were composed by one of the ensemble members. We actually use the interludes strategically. If we have like a complicated reset between two pieces, we'll put an interlude in there. So that'll be like some pre-recorded audio that the student creates. And in fact, for crowdsource, after the students record the audio from the crowd, in order to give them a little time to get prepared, I'll usually play an interlude right after we record, but before they play crowdsource, so they can be on their headphones, kind of getting everything ready to go. We also did a really cool piece that a student composed called Quadrants, where he created a graphic score that was divided into 4 quadrants for each of the 4 members of the ensemble. And then what we did was we cut the piece of paper into the 4 quadrants and flipped them over as kind of like playing cards, kind of. And then I asked every musician to like draw a card right before the performance, and then they flip it over and they interpret that score kind of spontaneously, not having known in advance which one they would get. And then we project the graphic score behind the ensemble, so the audience can kind of guess while they're listening who was assigned which quadrant, which can be fun.
I had another guest on way back who introduced me. This is so outside my world, but early trackers. I don't know if you ever interacted with trackers.
Not sure.
It's basically like a really early way of doing electronic music, like back in the 90s.
Huh.
And it was basically like cells, and the joke was that it was sheet music, but it was like Excel sheet,
Oh my gosh!
spreadsheet
Wow. Yeah, I'm not
music.
familiar with that. No. Well.
But yeah, I'm just kind of laughing of like what those might look like. Would you be able to provide an image of some kind I could share with people
Yeah. Absolutely.
of one of those?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like this conversation would be remiss if we didn't talk about, do you see AI having any part in this, either currently or in the future?
Yeah. It's big hot topic, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because in electronic music and music technology, there's always been discussion of AI, and it's meant different things at different times, right? The kind of joke is that AI is whatever computers can't currently do.
Sure.
And so that just keeps like changing, right? So like in the 90s, like so many things that we really take for granted now, like even like autocomplete kind of features, I think would have been described as AI. And now that's kind of a separate thing. That's just like basic computer stuff, whatever. And now AI is this other thing, right? So in terms of like generative AI and the kind of massive things that are, that are happening now, and with all the environmental impact and all the complicated politics around it, I think a lot of that I don't immediately see as connected to what I'm doing or what the group's doing. I think it's really hard to distinguish what are kind of like what is marketing language, and language intended to convince people of specific things for ulterior motives versus what is the actual what technological innovations, if any, are underneath it, right? But in terms of like the idea of like computers having a role in creativity, that's a very open question that a lot of people have engaged with in like really interesting and different ways over the years, right? So one
Yeah.
thing that I love about working with technology and specifically like computers or things that approach AI or machine learning is there's a possibility for inference, right? So you throw a bunch of things at a computer system and you ask it to like infer what is the pattern, what is the underlying logic, what is the whatever. And the computer will give you interesting results sometimes, right? Because it doesn't have the same experience as you, it doesn't have the same training as you, it doesn't have the same biases as you. And so it can be like a mirror to kind of say, well, I'm analyzing this way because I was trained in like Roman numeral chord analysis, or I was trained in set theory or whatever. And then the computer says, well, actually the underlying logic is this other thing over here. That's a pretty cool possibility, right? And that's a functionality that has existed for a long time in like computational music theory or musicology. So I think there's a role for that kind of decision making and that kind of quote unquote creativity in the artistic process and in the performance process as well. But especially when you're dealing with like commercial apps, there's such a there's such an obscurity around what they're actually doing and what they're actually drawing on that it makes me really hesitant to engage with it because I feel like there's a big chance of either you're being kind of deceived in one way or another, and that's something that feels well yeah I'll say it that way that yeah you're feeling like you're kind of being deceived. B, it's doing something different than you think you're doing or than it thinks it's doing. And then C, a lot of times with these apps, like the quote unquote like premium AI features will like pop up as like add-ons that you can buy. And whenever I'm like trying to make music and then I'm like prompted to buy something from my app, it makes me want to throw up.
Yeah.
And so I practically speaking, I've just kind of steered clear of the like cutting edge generative stuff that you might come across with some of these apps, and mostly we don't engage with it that way, but that's not to say that there aren't interesting roles for technology and computers in the creative process.
Yeah, and I feel like the students are the ones who will flesh that out. Maybe
Yeah.
not necessarily now, but it will they shall go forth and figure out the capabilities.
Yeah, I think so. If they come across something and they want to use it, like I'm open to that. And that's kind of an advantage of running the group the way that I do is that
Yeah.
I'm not the only one making these kinds of decisions. And I know that people younger than you and I have a very different perspective on AI, I think, than a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people our age,
Yeah.
which I sometimes find startling. But I think one has to accept that people will have different perspectives on things based on their lived experience, right? So,
Absolutely. Do you ever compose or take anything from these? It sounds like you don't write stuff for these ensembles, but do you ever take some of the ideas or practices into any of your own work that you make? Do you ever improvise on an iPad, I guess is what my question is.
I mean, I have for fun. I don't think I've ended up integrating anything into a composition
Yeah.
yet, but I
But you'll
definitely
just sit down and play
have.
the iPad, pick up your
Yeah,
flute, pick up your guitar.
that's
Why
right.
not?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I find it an absolutely legitimate, rich, interesting musical instrument. And like I said, some of the interfaces are so imaginative. They're so creative. They're so cool. So I've really been. I think when I was first kind of tasked with leading this group, I think I was a little dubious of what all was possible with an iPad, and I've been really amazed, the deeper that I've gone, obviously, there's always going to be IT frustrations and, premium features with the apps and all these, weird issues that come up with the App Store and licenses and all these, boring things. Um, but despite all of that, at its core, with a lot of these apps, there's real musical potential that I've discovered, and plenty that the students have discovered that they kind of turned me on to, where they would discover something and be like, oh, you could be doing this, or you could do this, or you could preload this, or you can sequence this way. And it's really cool to not only discover that stuff for yourself, but have your students discovering stuff that you didn't even know was there.
What a unique bond they must have. That's fun.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel like we could talk about this a lot more, but I feel like we need to move to my final question. So, zeitgeist moment, again, means kind of like a moment when you connect with music or through music, or and you're around music in some way, to something that feels a little bigger than yourself. So I'll ask you to share what was either a recent or a memorable zeitgeist moment for you. And while you're thinking about it, I'll share one that came to mind while you were talking. I don't have experience with anything like this exactly, but my first time recognizing the improvisatory nature of, well, really of a DJ and the art of DJ was when I was in Portland running a music school for a little while. We had a DJ program there. And for recruiting, we would do events all around town. And our DJ instructor was out at some like lunch and learn in front of the federal building or something. It was like some buy your employees food carts type of thing. It was such an odd time, but he just decided to he was in a zone, and he started performing, and it was like he was doing it kind of for himself. There was not a lot of people around, and I was absolutely floored what he was able to do on his computer. I got it. That was my moment where I got it. I saw this whole world of DJ in a way that it's not just like, oh, you're at the club and now you're getting down and now you're going to get a drink and now you're dancing on the floor. But it opened my eyes to the live performance aspect of that. Obviously different from what you're doing here, but I had never considered. It had all seemed so programmed to me, and I mean, it was truly an exceptional performance to watch at this silly little thing in front of, I don't know, some government building in Portland. And that was an absolutely phenomenal afternoon. I just sat back and watched him in awe. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, seeing a really skilled DJ being able to synchronize things and anticipate things, and just it's they're for anyone who's used electronic music software before, they're familiar tasks in that you're mixing between one thing and another, or you're taking a sample and moving it somewhere else. But to actually do it in performance in real time, it's such an incredible skill. And it also, when you're under the pressure of actually making a performance, you're kind of making changes and transformations happen, but you have to do them in a way that every single step of the process is interesting. And that's such a fascinating challenge.
Yeah. And it was not just layering songs or queuing up this song to overlay with this song.
Right.
It was adding in swishes of wind and doing all of these other sounds. Yeah. And it was true art. It was true musical artistry. And I hadn't thought of it that way until that moment.
That's cool. It kind of reminds me of there's a thing called live coding in music, which I don't know if you've ever heard of, but it's where people will code a music a musical patch or musical software live, and you can see on screen as they go kind of line by line. But the idea is it's also a performance, so you have to input your things, you have to write your lines of code in an order such that the result is going to be interesting and going to kind of develop over time. It just kind of makes me think of, it's kind of I never thought of the connection with with like DJing, but I guess it's kind of like a similar thing where you're like
Interesting.
going through a process, but everyone's listening to you go through the process, and so you have to
Right,
make it
right,
interesting. Yeah.
right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear from you, Drake. What's either a recent or a memorable moment for you with music?
Yeah, I think a recent moment, I mean to be on theme with the iPad ensemble this past fall. So I moved up to Connecticut for this job, and I live in the city of Danbury, which is where the American composer Charles Ives lived.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And every October they celebrate Charles Ives' birthday. And so this past fall we were invited to the iPad ensemble was invited to perform as part of like the festivities. And so we gave a performance at a local theater, but before we did that, we actually went to his house, his birthplace, which is now a museum, part of the Danbury Museum, and a couple of members of the iPad ensemble came along, and they were actually sampling all the sounds around his house. So that was kind
Yeah.
of like the ducks in the pond nearby, and like the wind going through the trees, and it was just really like an incredible sight to see them like sitting on like Charles Ives' couch, like recording samples, and then they had a gramophone that I think maybe had belonged to the Ives family, or at least was from the same period, and they were playing these really old recordings, and I saw the students just like recording the sounds of these gramophone records with their iPads, in order to sample them later, and they did in fact, integrate these samples into a later performance. So it was just this amazing moment of like number one, just being in a place where a musician you admire got their inspiration and like hearing those sounds. But then to be passing that on to another generation and for them to be like finding ways to integrate those sounds and that inspiration into what they're doing and what they find musically interesting. I think that was just a really special experience.
That is so cool because he was also on the cutting edge of doing things that no one had ever done before, which is what these students are doing in a way as well.
Absolutely. I
Ah,
think in some sense he would have approved. I think he was a little bit
I
of
think so.
a Luddite when it came to technology, but supposedly he didn't have a radio, but then when his music started getting played on the radio later in his life, he would apparently sneak over to his neighbor's house to listen to the radio secretly. So I think there's a part of him maybe that would have been sympathetic.
Oh, that's delightful. Well, Drake, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you,
This has been
Morgan.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's been terrific. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Zeitgeist Radio, and thanks to Drake for joining me. His website link is in the episode description. Please check it out. Please also subscribe to Zeitgeist Radio on whatever channel you're listening to right now. Seriously, push the button. Push the button. Did this episode make you think of a Zeitgeist moment of your own? I'd love to hear about it. Make a comment or email me at info@zeitgeistacademy.com. I'm Morgan Rowe. Thanks for listening.